If you've been online around TTRPG discussions, you've probably seen the phrase, Pathfinder fixes this, or something similar to it, because Pathfinder does have a lot of design evolutions compared to things that came before it. But now, there are many things that have come after it, one of which is Starfinder 2e. And because Starfinder 2e uses the same system as Pathfinder 2e, it is useful to us as GMs and designers to see what evolutionary changes it makes on top of the Pathfinder 2e system. Because there are some things that Starfinder fixes. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. After a bit of a hiatus due to another bout of vocal sickness, I am back here, and this time with new books on my shelves, specifically a bunch of Starfinder books, because I am suddenly interested in space fantasy. I will admit, I did not have much of an interest in space fantasy before Starfinder 2e came out, but knowing how easy it is to just go from Pathfinder 2e to Starfinder 2e, where most of my knowledge just immediately carries over, that made me interested enough to look up the system, to play a bit in it, and to run some Starfinder Society games. What I found was that there are a few subtle changes, and one not so subtle change, that Starfinder 2e makes when compared to Pathfinder 2nd edition, and most of the changes are things that I agree with that are in the better direction. The structure of this video is going to be, the first part, I'm going to talk about specific system features that are different in Starfinder 2e. Then I'm going to talk about my experience running Starfinder Society as compared to Pathfinder Society, and what this taught me about running my own home games differently. And then the last little bit, which is going to be Patreon exclusive, is just going to be talking about the fighter problem in Pathfinder 2e, which Starfinder does not seem to have. So let's begin with system-wide comparison. What is something that Starfinder does better? And the thing that really immediately stood out to me is that from the very beginning, from level 1 itself, every class has an in-class way to fill out all 3 of their actions. My first ever video on this channel was praising the 3-action economy, and it is interesting to me to see the evolution of these systems, that when Pathfinder started out, in the classes that it put out, like the Ranger with Hunted Shot, or even the Fighter, these classes didn't necessarily have a good 3rd action option. And the design evolution within Pathfinder has been so that we get classes now that do have good ways to fill out all 3 of their actions. Well, Starfinder has the benefit of starting out with its very first classes with that design philosophy already in mind. Even a class that just wants to take a single powerful shot from a distance, like the Operative, still gets the aim action, a way to slightly increase their damage when aiming down the sights of a gun. And caster classes get a very specific 3rd action bespoke to their class. The Mystic gets a heal action that they can just keep doing. It's a constant drip feed of HP. And the Witch Warper gets to move around their reality warping terrain or do an action with the anchoring trait in addition to casting some kind of a spell or cantrip. So I really like that in Starfinder 2e, when you start out, you don't need to go to the splat books to get classes that already have a good way of filling out all 3 of the actions on a turn. The second related thing is they also get reactions. Well, they aren't built into the base chassis of the class. Most of these reactions come online at 2nd level with class feats. Nevertheless, these are good reactions. So you don't get the equivalent of the Barbarian's No Escape. Okay, tangent to the tangent. Do you all think No Escape for the Barbarian is a good feat where you chase after the target that you are attacking? Because I find that in most practical combats, that target doesn't usually run away. Just completely curious about what your experience has been with No Escape. Let me know down below if you think it's a good feat. But going back to Starfinder, the kind of reactions that they have, such as the Envoy's Watch Out, where they increase an ally's AC just by yelling, "Watch out." That's flavorful, and it is, referencing one of my previous videos, cooperative. It makes you pay attention to not just your turn or your target's turn, but also when enemies and allies are taking their own turns. So we have generally useful low-level reactions that frequently force you to pay attention when it's not just your or your target's turn, which is great. Taking these 2 points together, you not only have a way of filling out your core 3 actions, but also your pseudo 4th action, the reaction, without going out of class. This is good design. What is not necessarily good design, but good for the system design, which is how the classes in Starfinder 2e are more generalists that have multiple domains rather than hyper specialists like in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Initially, I had thought that being a specialist was good in Pathfinder when I was first assessing the system because it forces the party to work as a team. You know, you have the cleric who's the greatest healer, you have the fighter who's the most accurate at hitting, you have the bard who's the best at buffing and debuffing, and it's good to have this party of specialists that work together to really boost the power of what the team can handle. But since playing more of the system and doing a lot of different builds, I have realized that I tend towards broader builds. For example, I would much rather play an Outwit Ranger than the Flurry Ranger, because the Flurry Ranger is very specialized, but the Outwit Ranger gets to adapt to the circumstances better. That may be a whole different video on why I really like the Outwit Ranger, but I don't think that's super germane to this discussion, so setting that tangent aside for some other time, let's just talk about the Starfinder 2e classes. For example, we know that in Pathfinder 2e, the Bard is the best at buffing allies' attacks. Well, in Starfinder 2e, you can have that be done by the Envoy with their Get 'em action, or you can have that be done by the Mystic with their Anthem focus spell. And the thing is, both of them are doing 2 things at the same time, or can do 2 things at the same time, I should say. Unlike the Bard's Courageous Anthem, which is specific to boosting up attacks, but it does it in a wide area regardless of targets, the Envoy's Get 'em, it applies to a specific target, but it also lets the Envoy gets a damage boost to their ranged shot. So you have a buff combined with a damage boost. And then on the Mystic side, when they heal an ally with Transfer Vitality, it's, again, small amounts of healing, it does add up, they can extend the Anthem focus spell, a sort of pseudo-sustain it, to go an extra round. So you have healing combined with buffing. And this is just a very stark example of what's seen more generally, where the martial classes, maybe with the exception of operative, have other things they can do, many different approaches. The Solarian is known for the melee, but they also come with a, I believe, like built-in ranged blast. The Soldier can do area damage and do single target damage, and with a feat they can create a temporary cover. And these are more obvious ways of having different modes of engagement with the game than the more subtle ways that Pathfinder 2e has. I would say if you're playing a Pathfinder 2e Barbarian, your primary mode of engagement is going to be to go up and hit an enemy while raging. You're going to need to know a lot about the specifics of the game before you can start thinking about, oh, target selection is a big part of tactics, or not moving when it's my turn and delaying my turn could be a big part of tactics. These are not things that occurs to first-time players. But even first-time players can pick up the Soldier and see, oh, okay, I have the option to do area fire or single target fire. I wonder which one will be most useful right now. So that's the third point. And all of these 3 points lead to point number 4, which is Starfinder 2e feels way more beginner-friendly. As I've said, you can just take a class and you will have ways to fill out the 3 actions without going out of class. You will have multiple approaches to a combat within the same class and the actions that it provides. You have a smaller set of classes available, just right now at least. You start out with just having to choose between 6. So that's already less intimidating than even just looking at the core classes for Pathfinder 2e. And this is just a very minor thing, but sample builds in Starfinder 2e for casters also list recommended spells, whereas for some reason they don't seem to do that with Pathfinder 2e's sample builds. Just, again, little bits and pieces that together combine to make Starfinder 2e a better first-time player experience than Pathfinder 2e. Now, I obviously love Pathfinder 2e. I love diving into the design of it and figuring out the subtle different ways of getting an edge in combat. But having these more obvious ways is more welcoming. Speaking of tiny differences, systemic ones, there are things called spell amps, spell ampules, which are just like injections pre-filled with a specific buff spell that can be used by anyone. I like that. I've always thought that the rogue should have some way of going invisible instead of that being something that wizard necessarily has. And so it's nice for a rogue or an envoy to be able to just inject themselves into invisibility. Another small thing which people have brought up in various places is that there's the traversal trait. It says that if this feat or spell mentions striding, then you can also use this for other move speeds like flying, burrowing, climbing, swimming. I think that's a nice little trait to have handy instead of the Pathfinder 2e version of writing that extra sentence down every time. And then there is the big, not so subtle change, which is the boost in the damage of ranged weapons. And I do use the word boost purposely. It is clear that Starfinder 2e wants to reward the use of ranged weapons, and it does so in two ways: boosting the damage of available ranged weapon options, and also, in a way, tamping down on how much melee damage is possible. I noticed that there's no fighter equivalent in terms of accuracy for two-handed melee weapons, which tend to be the most damaging. And so with that out of the picture, melee damage from the Solarian or from the one-handed operative can be closer to ranged damage while still having a little bit of an edge. But there may be a perverse incentive being set up here, perverse incentive being a technical term used by economists, I believe, which is that when I started playing a caster in Starfinder 2e, my first approach as a min-maxer was to get martial weapon proficiency and pick up the plasma caster with the boost trait. Because when I compare a 2-action cantrip to the 2-action version of shooting a plasma caster with boost, it is just night and day. Yes, I get to use my spellcasting attribute for the cantrip, but if I've invested in Dex, that's only a 1-point difference, and the damage difference is massive when comparing attack cantrips. Something like Ignition, which I believe is at range just 2d4 damage, whereas the Plasma Caster is a d8 plus a d10 if you've boosted, and it has the added flexibility that you can choose to shoot it with just one action without boosting. So the flip side of making ranged attacks so powerful is, well, without adding cantrips that can keep up with this at early levels, is that, to me at least, it incentivizes an early pickup of a ranged martial weapon. All right, so those were the system-wide differences between Pathfinder 2e and Starfinder 2e, and now I want to discuss specific things that the Starfinder Society does that's better than Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and that taught me how to change how I run my home games in either edition, regardless of the version. First, I noticed that the enemies in Starfinder Society modules tend to not fight until death. As far as I have seen, and my experience is limited, so take this with a grain of salt, but from what I have seen, enemies that are not mindless will not fight to death. They will have a clear retreat condition listed out. And I think that's great. Everyone should consider morale and retreat in combat. The second thing is that in a Starfinder 2nd Edition Society module, I noticed that when I was running for a level 1 module, the module was giving out consumables to the players that were level 3. And this, I think, is great. The level of the consumables is or rather the power of a consumable relative to its level is appropriate given what players can craft with their money. But when it comes to what the adventure gives or gifts or rewards the players, that is perfectly okay to be of a higher level than the level of the player characters. This is something Kiche has been frequently mentioning in my previous Pathfinder videos, that because the levels are reliable, it leaves you as a GM some freedom to give the players higher level rewards when you see fit. So having that precedence be set by something as official as Starfinder Society module is great. We should all as GMs be giving out at least consumables that are slightly higher level, or maybe massively higher level than the level of your player characters. The third thing is I noticed that the iconics, the pre-built, pre-generated characters for Starfinder 2e, they all pick up the cooperative reaction. I've already made a whole video about this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it is good that the iconics pick up these reactions so that when new players come and play at the table, they have ways of engaging with the game outside of their turn. But speaking of new players coming to the table and playing level 3 characters, the Starfinder 2e Society allows you to start off a new character at level 3 or at level 5, not just at level 1. I think this is great for players who are experienced with the system. And I also feel that when you're running home games, this is probably a good idea when starting out a new homebrew campaign. If your players have already played through levels 1 to 7, just start them out at level 3 or level 5. I will say that levels 1, 2, and 3 are still useful if you want to do a bit of a grittier dungeon crawl. But if that's not your campaign, then just skip it. Go to the higher levels. And then finally, and this one is just a personal gripe that has been fixed for Starfinder Society, the enemy stat blocks are in line with the adventure instead of being at the very back. In Pathfinder Society, I have to constantly flip through the sheets. Find Starfinder Society, I can just get in the flow of running the game. So these have been my early observations of what Starfinder does differently from Pathfinder. I have not looked at all of the ancestries in the, Galactic Ancestries book that has just come out, things that seem quite powerful. It's going to take some time for me to absorb that knowledge, figure out how it changes the game, if it is good for the health of the game. And so I cannot and am not commenting on that right now. Just in terms of the player core and from running a few Starfinder Society games, these are the systemic things that I have noticed are different that I have liked. If you are interested to hear my thoughts on the fighter problem and how Starfinder 2e avoids it, join me on Patreon for the extended edition of this video. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.